Former Johannesburg Housing MMC Mlungisi Mabaso joins us for more on this story and is obviously familiar with some of the events around this. Mlungisi, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us on Africa Today. Now, in light of the recent fire incident in Johannesburg that obviously claimed many lives, share with us, please, your initial reactions and thoughts on the tragedy.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and greetings to yourself and the viewers. Let me first convey our deepest condolences to the bereaved families, and also those that were hospitalized. We wish them a speedy recovery. We went on the scene today after the council got adjourned, and when we got there, we were able to see the extent of the damage in the building, but we were also able to engage with some of the residents that were residing inside the building and those that are residing in the buildings that are nearby. And what had happened in that building, it's a very bad situation that will not, one that will not wish for everyone, to experience such what they experienced. But it was not for the first time that the city finds itself in the position that it has found itself in now. You will remember that a year or two ago, we had a similar incident with the Kazeni building where 9 lives were lost. And at the time, I was still the MMC for human settlements in the city. We immediately responded. At the time, we evacuated everyone out of the building. But what we then decided to do was to demolish the building, to try and avoid the reoccupation of the building, because immediately after you have responded to incidents such as this one, a few months down the line, people will go and rebuild the illegal structures inside the building, and they start occupying the building again. And we need to avoid that at all costs, because we are yet to learn what was the cause of fire. But I can tell you, most of these incidents are caused by illegal connections, and it might happen that there were illegal connections that gone wrong, which had led to this kind of tragedy that we have witnessed now. But
sorry,
so
allow me to come in there. You talk about we. Who are you representing in this instance in which you visited the scene of this tragedy?
Oh, well, we were with the other councillors of the city of Johannesburg, but also because I'm a leader of an IFP caucus in Johannesburg. So I was with my colleagues from the IFP caucus and other leaders from other caucuses, because immediately when the council got adjourned in the morning, we all went there. But I was going there with the leaders of the IFP that are my colleagues in the Johannesburg Council. Okay,
we appreciate that clarity. Now, just give us some insights into the issue around hijacked buildings in Johannesburg. How prevalent is it, and what is the cause? How do these buildings get hijacked?
Well, there are multiple factors that one did observe. One is that the Johannesburg Property Company that manages properties on behalf of the city council, has not been paying a close attention to the properties that the city owns. So they've allowed those buildings, to be hijacked. They are not maintaining those buildings, and this, criminal syndicate has taken advantage of that situation. Secondly, there are buildings that are owned by people who went to stay in overseas, and they've left those buildings unattended, and criminal elements also occurred and took advantage of the situation. Other buildings are owned by people that are deceased, and you'll find that family members were not, aware that a deceased, in fact, owned one of the properties. And you also learn that the owner of the building could not afford to pay services to government and decided to leave the building unattended, and this criminal syndicate then take over the buildings and rent them out. So there are multiple factors, in fact, that have led to buildings, getting hijacked, and people taking advantage of the situation and start, illegally allocating those that are in need of houses within the inner city and start charging them rent, connect illegal to the municipal services, and engage themselves in all those illegal activities.
Now, in your experience as a former MMC, what can be done to deal with this rather unfortunate situation in the city of Johannesburg?
Well, the reality is that because the assessment must be done in a form of an audit, so that those buildings are able to be identified. And once they are identified, there must also be an assessment in terms of compliance to check if these buildings are in fact complying in terms of occupational health and safety standards. And if they are not complying, then that's when this building must then be condemned, so that people who are residing inside these buildings are then evicted or relocated to an alternative accommodation. But there is a process to that, and I heard, in fact, earlier on, all the government officials that were being interviewed, they were blaming, your NGOs and your Human Rights Commission, that they tend to contact them when they evict people. I mean, I don't know how many evictions I conducted, and I don't know how many times I've been taken to court, but I won all those cases, because it's not about evicting people, it's about the processes that you engage yourselves on, because both the landlord and the tenants are protected by law. So it's a matter of how you engage yourselves with the law, so that at least the law is able to protect you. So these buildings must be assessed, condemned, and people must be evicted or relocated into an alternative accommodation. And in that process of an alternative accommodation, it don't just happen because you want to evict a person, then you are compelled to provide an alternative accommodation. There must be a court order which compels you to provide an alternative accommodation. It's not every time where you are compelled. And in the city of Johannesburg, there is a policy that speaks to who should qualify for an alternative accommodation and how the person should be allocated and how long you should be staying in a building where you have been, temporarily housed by government. So it's not a matter of, being contested by your series and other NGOs. It's about how you are engaging yourself in the process. And government officials need to learn to engage themselves in this process, so that they do not lose these battles in court when they are taken to court. And government needs to do assessment, condemn these buildings, so that they protect the lives of our people, because immediately when they allow people to stay in the buildings that are dilapidated, such as that one, in the buildings that are not compliant, these things are bound to happen, where there are fires that cannot be extinguished, because even the fire extinguishers inside the buildings are not compliant and they are not working.
Well, Mlungisi, that's obviously half the story, which is relocating individuals from these buildings that are being occupied. And they're being occupied because many of these individuals do not have options on decent housing. Just how much is government doing in order to provide adequate housing for these individuals? There appears to be very little to no plan.
Well, the plans are there. What I will say is that the implementation part, that is a bit slow. I mean, I demolished a building, like a year ago. And if you check in the system now with the department, not much has been done. So the problem is with the implementation and the fact that, the Department of Human Settlement has not really paid much attention into the inner city. All the developments have been outside the inner city. They've been in the peripheries of Johannesburg. So there has not been a special focus, in the inner city. And that's what we're trying to address when we started introducing, that mixed development in Kazan, which was going also to talk to your PNG, the fully subsidized houses in the inner city, where you are giving people houses for free, because the assumption that has always been there from government officials is that people who are residing within the inner city can afford to pay rent. And that's not the case. There are people there who actually cannot afford to pay, but they are residing in the inner city. And that's why you will find in most of the buildings in the inner city, when you get inside, They are not buildings. In fact, they are informal settlements. You will find sheds inside the buildings. You will find petitioning that is a health hazard for a human being inside these buildings, and it's because people in the inner city have not been given much attention that they also deserve, and that's why government needs to acquire these buildings, convert them into low-cost houses, and also introduce RDP houses within the inner city, because there are people who are actually staying there who cannot afford to pay rent, and those people also need assistance from government.
Former Johannesburg housing MMC Mlungisi Mabaso, appreciate your time on the show today.